George Cointe was a remarkable man. He was French, and he had recently come to the United States, and he had been teaching boxing, wrestling, and fencing at the French equivalent of West Point at Saint Cyr. And he had a big diploma to show that he was qualified. Prior to his coming to Cornell, he had been coaching fencing at Evander Childs High School in Manhattan. And they were the city champs. And one of the Cornell alumni asked him if he would be interested in coming up to Cornell and coaching up there. And that happened before I met him. But the two of us arrived at just about the same time. So he always told me we were freshmen together. George had gotten a job selling rugs at Macy's. He says, "Davy, could you imagine me selling rugs?" I said, "No." He said, well, he had a lot of time on his hands, and he had a hobby. He would carve out of soap infants' hands, and they were so realistic. He was a master carver, and it looked as though the infant's hand had been cut off, and the flesh was painted red, and it looked like somebody was giving you. Well, anyway, one of his customers turns out to be the president of Procter & Gamble, who sent him a case of soap to carve. He said he stopped carving soap at that time. That was too much. We had a very, very lovely relationship. And as time went on, my fencing skills improved considerably so that I could beat him now and then. And he would become very unhappy when that happened. However, I think he was also pleased that I had progressed. Every now and then he'd get a request to put on a fencing exhibition at some private men's club or group or whatever, and since George needed somebody to fence with, I would be the one that he would ask. And I was delighted to accept his invitation because it meant $10, which at the time was an impressive amount of money. It seemed that he would get $25 for that exhibition, and he would give me 10, and he would supply me with a very fancy fencing outfit. And we all had a good time because dinner was included. There was no drinking in those days, although during a meet, I remember one time George gives me a little glass, a little shot glass. He says, "Davy, you drink this, it'll help you." So what was it? It was a shot glass, a cube of sugar in the bottom, and on top of that was brandy, cognac. I was not a drinker. However, I figured, what the hell? So I managed to get this stuff down. The sugar had already dissolved, and I could just about jump up and hit the ceiling. I was very agile in those days, and I was a killer. Those are the days later on, in the later 30s, where the animosity between the Japanese and the Chinese was very high. Cornell and China always had a relationship. They were swapping students, and the Japanese contingent, and of course they didn't speak to each other, but all sentiment was for the Chinese because the Japanese had invaded Manchuria. So one day, a Japanese guy comes up to the fencing room and talks to George he'd like to learn, he'd like someone to teach him how to fence with sabers. And I happened to be standing nearby, and things are kind of slow. So George looks at me, Davy, why don't you give him a lesson? So he and I already disliked this kid because he was Japanese. We had nothing, we didn't even know him. So I put on a plastron, that's a heavy padded protective device, and I give this kid a regular fencing jacket and a mask. So I just beat him up. I was mean. I would crack him on the shoulder, right where the neck joins and the blade would flip over, and the tip of the blade would, on both sides. He couldn't lift his arms. He never came back. I was fencing at the time they first introduced the electronic touch. A couple of guys at Columbia had engineering students who were fencers, thought it up, and I remember seeing George practicing one day with this thing hooked up, and he's doing all kinds of unnecessary things. I said, "What the hell are you doing, George?" He says, "I'm trying to cheat." He wants to see if certain things would make it. But now the uniforms are woven with metallic strips in them, so that you don't need any fancy other connections. When I was 70 years old, talking about George, I hadn't fenced for about 45 years. I saw in the Montgomery County Department of Recreation fencing lessons under the supervision of a fencing master. I decided I'm going to go and see what's happened, see if I can still fence. I had several foils and a mask and a glove, and I drive to this place on some dark night, and at this time I had cataracts in both eyes, and I'm wearing glasses. And I was a damn fool for going, but I had to go. And I'm greeted at the entrance by a tall, about 6'3" chap in a white uniform. And I said, "Are you the fencing master?" He says, "Yes, I am." I said, "Where did you get the designation fencing master?" He said, "At Cornell." I said, "Really?" Yeah, he said I was a computer science student, but in the meantime, so he asked me, "Did you ever fence before?" I said, "Yes, a long time ago." He said, "And where did you fence?" I said, "At Cornell." He said, "Really? Who was the coach when you were there?" I said, "Georges Cointe." He comes to attention. "Georges Cointe. The man is a legend." I said, "Well, he wasn't quite a legend yet when I knew him." And he said, "Well, did you want to fence?" I said, "That's why I'm here." So I'm thinking to myself, I'm crazy, because I can't see as good as I used to. I'm wearing glasses, and there was no mat on the floor, which is a help. No, you know where you are. So he beats me 5'3". So he's standing there and he says, "How old are you?" I said, 70. He said, "You can still fence." I never went back. I had to have my eyes attended to. I think I'm not going to be able to fence anymore. But that was my last experience actually fencing. But I was thinking to myself, I have to admit, that's pretty good considering I'm an old duffer now.